Okay, I'm going to try not to be on this video too long because at times I can be quite long-winded, okay? Because things keep coming to my head more and more. And the more it comes to my head, the more I speak it. And then when I look at the time, it's like 30 minutes, 40 minutes sometime. So I'm going to try to keep this as short as I possibly can. But before I get started, I want you guys to click on the links on the bottom and donate to the channel, leave an offering, or whatever you choose to call it. I have a Chime link. I have a Cash App link. Feel free to utilize those links in the description box. So for the last couple of weeks, it's been in my mind and just sitting back watching and observing everything that's going on, not just in Israel and Palestine, but right here in America. And the question came to my mind is, why are Americans so divided over something that's happening in an entirely different nation? What's happening over in Israel and Palestine has nothing to do with Americans. It has nothing to do with the struggles of Americans. Even the so-called black Americans that are oppressed. When black Americans had their issues, and we still do, there's no other nation that came to our defense. Now, they might have mentioned it maybe over in the UK, in the media, over in Africa. They might have mentioned it in Russia. They might have mentioned it even in China. But I think their hearts were far from it. It was more of a political thing against the president or the government here in this country. I don't think it was because of the fact that they were so concerned about the so-called black Americans, because black Americans that traveled to those nations also experienced discrimination and racism. So I really don't think it was because they care about black Americans. Although I must admit, it did sound good coming over the media from other nations that are paying attention. But then Ilhan Omar, and I was trying to find that video clip where she was coming at Black Lives Matter or the so-called black community and reminded black Americans that it was the squad, it was the Democrats that stood up and promoted Black Lives Matter, that caused Black Lives Matter to go globally. And then the light bulb came on in my head, and I'm like, that's why they call upon black Americans, because you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Or I scratch your back, you scratch mine. So now that the so-called squad used the seat of Congress, they use the White House, the political power or tool, to push Black Lives Matter. So now they expect the so-called black Americans to return the favor. So now, instead of black Americans supporting Israel, they are now expected to support Palestine / Hamas, because they will quickly use, speaking Ilhan Omar and even foreign nations, well, what about what happened to George Floyd? When George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe. So now we expect the so-called black Americans to take the reign and set off the protests, set off the revolution. Because so many other nations was inspired by what the so-called black Americans had done here in this nation, although black Americans are still at the bottom. Because black Americans have to realize how powerful they are when they are united as one. Black Americans that are so used to helping other people in other nations and forget about uniting and helping themselves. When those same so-called nations or other countries that black Americans protest and fight for, then when black Americans speak on things such as reparation, those same nations that the so-called black Americans defended and vouched for are now saying, you don't deserve reparations. You weren't enslaved. We had nothing to do with it. So where's the support for black Americans concerning reparation? Where's the support for black Americans when it comes to these police shootings? Black Americans have always fought for self. And because of what little crumbs black Americans had gained from their protest, now you have other nations wanting to capitalize off of that and weaponize the so-called black Americans. And I say black Americans because Black Lives Matter is a political group. And now Black Lives Matter is expected to protest and vouch for Hamas or Palestine. And even Miss Israeli had made an Instagram video, which I'm going to let you listen to, and listen to what she's got to say. Because when I heard that, my first thought is, why is it placed on the backs of black Americans to vouch and protest? Why are you looking to the lowest of the lowest to help and aid you? And then they use George Floyd to try to make black Americans feel guilty and jump on their bandwagon, when black Americans have nothing to do with what's going on over in Israel and Palestine. I don't know why Americans are so caught up in that when we have our own issues here. There's people that's living on the street. There's people that's paying close to $3,000 just to live in an apartment. Gas is like off the chain. The food prices is insane. But yet we're worried about what's happening over in Palestine and Israel. Has nothing to do with us. So why are you so compassionate towards children over there, which is unfortunate, but yet care less about the children that's in the womb of black women that Congress got behind and pushed abortion upon black women? That's when you really stuck on the side of black. That's when you united with black Americans, is when you were pushing the abortion of black children. So that's okay. We want black women to have their rights to choose over their own bodies, when if you look at other races of people, other nations, white people, Arabs, Mexicans, Hispanics, they are still marrying. But that's a whole new topic. I said I wasn't going to be on this too long. But I want you to listen to Miss Israeli, what she had to say. And why is she targeting black Americans? Check this out.
I can't breathe. Do you remember that? I'm shocked. So shocked by the response of Black Lives Matter regarding the terror attack situation here in Israel. Remember you screaming in the street, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. So I want to inform you that right now there is Israeli hostages in Gaza. Babies, children, mothers, women, entire family who cannot breathe. They were kidnapped, raped by the terror organization Hamas. Do you think killing is enough for them? They attack people at the party near to the Gaza Strip. They kidnap women. They kidnap girls who have not started their life yet. They rape them, slaughtering their soul. Hamas is ISIS. Pray for us. Pray for Israel. Because we can breathe.
What does that have to do with the so-called black Americans? Do you remember when Israel kicked out those Africans? Where was Israel and even Palestine when black Americans was going through their own struggles? Again, what about when black Americans mention reparations? You have an issue with that. But you want black Americans / Black Lives Matter to cape for you in a war that has nothing to do with them. And you've never done anything for black Americans. I've never seen any Palestinians or Israelis protesting with black Americans, fighting for equal rights, or even fighting for a protection law here in America to protect black Americans from being slaughtered by law enforcement. Look at all of the shootings that took place, like, for example, in Buffalo or in black churches. Black Americans never received a protection law, but Asians did. So I don't understand why Americans are so in an uproar and divided over what's happening over in Palestine and Israel. It's unfortunate. And if they started bringing Israelis or Palestinians here in America, guess where they're going to put them? Right in the so-called black community to compete with the crumbs that the government had given us, although it's our tax dollars that's supposed to be at work for Americans. Keep in mind, they paid nothing into the system, but yet they reap the benefits from our tax dollars. And we're now still enforced to pay taxes to a country that ignores our troubles. So, feedback, tell me what you think, subscribe, support this channel. But I really don't understand or understand why black Americans are the ones that's targeted. Miss Israeli went beyond the government, people that can really probably help them politically. They bypassed Europeans, they bypassed Arabs, they bypassed Mexicans, they bypassed every other nation of people. But they targeted or honed in on the so-called black Americans. Like they expect black Americans to lead the pack for them. So feedback, tell me what you think. Until next time, I'm fearless.